I have told you 1,000 times, you cannot keep spending like this. We are barely making ends meet.
My name is Lena Harper. I'm 30 years old, and 10 months ago I did something people daydream about under fluorescent checkout lights. I won the lottery. After taxes and the lump sum, it came out to roughly $8. 7 million quietly wired into an account with a name so bland it could pass for a utility bill. When I finally told my family, I told them something else. They wouldn't be getting a single cent. If that sentence sounds cold or ungrateful, stay with me. The reason isn't a single explosive moment. It's a ledger of years, entries written in birthdays and Sunday dinners, in whispered requests outside the kitchen, in the slow realization that in my family, love could be measured, itemized, and withdrawn like cash from a machine. I should know. For most of my life, I was the machine. I grew up in suburban Ohio, on streets where lawn stripes looked like flags, and you could hear sprinklers before dawn. Inside our house, my mother reigned with a smile that felt like stage lighting. My father stood beside her in the glow, nodding agreement, careful to keep the scene moving. My sister, Emma, 3 years younger, played the princess in every season. Bigger bedroom, bigger birthday cakes, bigger forgiveness. If Emma forgot homework, teachers understood. If I got a 96, the question was why it wasn't a 100. If Emma cried, the furniture rearranged itself around her. If I cried, I was told to be strong. You can call it favoritism or the family culture, but what it trained in me was muscle memory. Be the dependable one, the responsible one, the one who will figure it out. As I got older, that role hardened into something uglier. I became the person you could guilt into paying. By 19, I knew my mother's script by heart. Family takes care of family. Your sister just needs help getting on her feet. It's hard for young people these days. She'd deliver it with a hand on my arm by the sink, or a soft-aside near the hall closet. My father would add the stamp, "Your mother is right, Lena," as if decency were a contract I'd already signed. It didn't sound like a demand. It sounded like love with terms and conditions. That's how transactions got mispronounced as affection in our home. Every kindness I gave became precedent, and precedent became obligation. I worked 2 jobs through college, slept in a room that felt like a corridor, and earned a marketing degree with honors. I waited for the congratulations that never really came. Instead, there was the first request with an exact number attached, $15,000 for Emma's credit card debt, clothes, Miami trips with her sorority sisters. I was 23, barely steady, and I paid it because I thought that's what good daughters do. Next came the cosign for a new SUV after Emma totaled her Honda while texting. Then rent for her first apartment, because jobs were hard. Then bail money for her boyfriend, while my mother whispered about not embarrassing the family. If you line the receipts in a row, the pattern is obvious. From inside the pattern, it felt like adulting with a halo on. I told myself generosity was character, not a habit someone could exploit. Holidays became quiet ambushes. On Thanksgiving, the pot roast arrived with a side of guilt, served under a toast about supporting each other. On Christmas, there was always a moment after dessert When Dad would clear his throat, Emma's struggling again, as if that sentence explained gravity. Sunday dinners turned tactical. I pre-wrote polite answers in my head, scanned for exits, practiced nodding without promising. Emma floated in late, kissed the air, and sprinkled words like opportunity the way people sprinkle salt. Everything sounded seasoned with hope and somehow tasted like another bill. By 29, the total I'd given my family had crossed $60,000. Later, I would tally it precisely as $63,000, parceled out through Zelle, checks, cash slipped across counters. Not once did anyone ask if I could afford it. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing. Not once did I hear a real thank you. I was a convenience, a service, a dependable vein, a human ATM until the day I put a new number in my pocket that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday in March. I stopped at a gas station under lighting, so unforgiving I could see the outline of my own fatigue. The Powerball had rolled over enough times to become a number people joke about. I rarely played, but I bought a ticket like you by a tiny dare against the universe. 3 days later, I sat in my car during lunch and checked the numbers. There's a way reality tilts when it refuses to fit back into its old shape. First, my hands shook, then my breath disappeared, then my mind tried not to understand and understood anyway. All 6 numbers, a perfect echo. I stared at them until they felt like coordinates to a life that might, for once, center me. My first impulse was the most dangerous one. Call Mom. I could hear the choreography already, the shock, the praise, the pivot to logistics. House for Emma. Car for Emma. Early retirement for them. Maybe a monthly allowance for household stability. I held the phone, thumb hovering, realizing that in their version of my miracle, I was already a footnote. So I didn't call my mother. I called a lawyer. Patricia specialized in sudden wealth. That's a polite way of saying she specialized in other people's expectations. She told me something brutally simple. Most lottery winners don't go broke on bad investments. They go broke on family and friends who feel entitled. Her advice was a list that sounded like security measures and functioned as boundaries. Tell no one for at least 6 months. Change nothing visible. Keep working. Keep your apartment. Keep your 7-year-old Toyota. Watch, she said. See who loved you when you had nothing to give. So I watched. At my mother's birthday, she cornered me near the dessert table and mentioned Emma's rent again. I gave her $200, then counted the seconds until her smile arrived and the conversation ended. In May, Emma got engaged to a man she'd been dating for 4 months. Over champagne, she asked me to pitch in $5,000, like handing back a sweater I'd left in her car. When I hesitated, she rolled her eyes, punctuation for the sentence. You'll do it anyway. By Thanksgiving, the performance had become ensemble work. Mom gave a toast about how family is the greatest blessing. Her eyes landed on me when she said support. Emma sighed about down payments and the market. Relatives laughed as if we shared a joke instead of a pattern. I didn't argue. I collected data. I documented the choreography between affection and need. From the outside, my story can look like a single hard decision. She got rich and refused to share. But that decision was built from 1,000 tiny ones, from the language we spoke for decades. In my family, money was fluency, and I spoke it so well I disappeared behind it. The winning ticket didn't buy me happiness. It bought me a chance to redefine what love would have to sound like if it wanted a place in my life. I didn't know yet about the January phone call, stage 3 breast cancer, a $30,000 gap in coverage that would turn out to be a lie. I didn't know yet how it would feel to say no and mean it. But I knew this much: the jackpot wouldn't be a family project. For the first time, I let myself speak a sentence I'd been trained to swallow. My peace matters more than their expectations. That's where this story truly begins. With a silent phone, a sealed mouth, and a plan to keep living small so I could finally think big. I am Lena Harper. I won $87 million. And this time, the first person I planned to save was me. I didn't become the family ATM overnight. It began in the soft places: birthday candles, school concerts, the bedtime moments when children decide who they are by what the adults in the room applaud. In our house, applause had a gravity of its own. It orbited Emma. Boom! When she was 6 and lied about breaking a vase, my mother called it imagination. When I was 9 and told the truth about missing a homework page, I was disappointing myself. Emma's disappointments were detours. Mine were indictments. You learn to read these weather systems without anyone naming them. Emma's storm clouds broke into rainbows. Mine meant I ought to pack an umbrella and be grateful for the lesson. By high school, the script ran like a well-rehearsed play. Emma's messes were teachable moments. My competence was a blessing to the family. That blessing, it turned out, converted neatly into labor. I tutored Emma in algebra while she scrolled through texts. When she aced the test, everyone cheered her willpower. I worked a part-time cashier job at the grocery store and used my tips to buy Emma a sparkly dress for the winter formal, because the other girls will have new ones, and it's hard to be young these days. My father wasn't cruel. He just floated in the space my mother created, nodding like punctuation. The more I handled, the more I was entrusted to handle. Responsibility is the most addictive drug handed out in certain families. It makes you feel capable while it erases you. College should have been the reset. I took 2 jobs, weekends at a coffee shop that smelled permanently of caramel and dishwater, weeknights shelving returns at the campus library, until my hands knew the decimal system like a prayer. I learned how to stretch $1 and a day, eating instant noodles in a dorm room that felt like a corridor with a bed. When I graduated with honors, I expected, if not celebration, then at least a pause in the endless hum of need. What came instead was the first request with a number attached, polished like a marble, $15,000 to clear Emma's credit card debt. Clothes she needed, trips to Miami with sorority sisters she couldn't say no to, fees that got out of hand. My mother delivered the pitch with a hand on my sleeve and a tone that conferred an adult honor. You're established now. You can help your sister get on her feet. Family takes care of family. I signed the transfer and went home to my studio apartment, proud and a little sick. It didn't stop. It just changed shape. After Emma totaled her Honda while texting, "Everyone makes mistakes," my mother cooed. The bank flagged her for terrible credit. Would I co-sign for a new SUV? "Just to help her start fresh," Dad said, as if signatures were paper towels you tear off without thinking. I signed again, telling myself this was a bridge to Emma's better self. When she couldn't hold a job for more than a season, rent landed on my lap with a sigh attached to it. When her boyfriend got arrested after a bar fight, there was no one else to call, and my mother whispered about not embarrassing the family. I learned how to Zelle in the dark and to keep receipts not for taxes but for sanity. And I learned, too, that if you help once, help becomes history. If you help twice, help becomes policy. Holidays turned into quiet ambushes disguised as tradition. Thanksgiving was pot roast and a toast about how the greatest blessing is family, with my mother's eyes brushing mine whenever the word support appeared in her sentences. Christmas always had a moment after pie when Dad would clear his throat and say Emma was having a rough patch, as if that phrase were a season we all had to live through. Sunday dinners were tactical exercises. I would prepare small talk topics like decoys, position myself near the kitchen doorway for a clean exit, smile without promising. Emma floated in late, perfume first, and told stories about networking opportunities that dissolved conveniently into rent shortfalls and damaged deposits. In those rooms, need was sacralized. Saying yes made you good. Saying no made you dramatic, ungrateful, selfish. It's amazing how quickly a family can teach a vocabulary that locks you into place. There's a reason I remember the numbers. When you've internalized that love has a checkout lane, the receipts become scripture. At 23, $15,000 to clear the credit cards. At 24, the co-signature on the SUV, the monthly fear that Emma would miss a payment and the bank would come for me. At 25, 2 months of rent, because starting out is hard. At 26, bail for the boyfriend I never liked and would later pretend not to recognize at a barbecue. The little pores that never filled a glass. Gas money. Emergency flights. Wedding deposits for friends of Emma's who rotated so often I can't remember their names. All the while, I paid my own bills, made my own meals, packed my own lunches, and learned how you can be two kinds of broke at once, financially strained and emotionally overdrawn. By 29, I did the math on paper because I needed to see the scar. Over $60,000, later I would tally it precisely as 63, had left my accounts and never once returned as gratitude or inquiry. Not a single time had anyone asked, "Can you afford this?" Not once had anyone said, "How are you doing?" They thanked me the way you thank a cash machine, with a glance and the assumption that it will be working tomorrow. If I hesitated, the labels arrived like police lights. Dramatic, ungrateful, selfish. I learned to flinch at my own boundaries. I learned to apologize for needing to breathe. There were small moments that should have woken me earlier. A summer Sunday when I got a nosebleed from stress before dessert, and my mother still found a way to pivot to Emma's overdue utilities. A spring afternoon when Emma called me in tears about a parking boot and ended the call laughing with friends because I had handled it. A winter week when my car needed repairs and I walked to work while my co-signed SUV for Emma sailed past me in the snow. These weren't just incidents. They were instructions. They said, "Your needs are footnotes." They said, "Your usefulness is your ticket to the table." If this sounds like anger, it's not. Anger flares and fades. This was sediment, years of silt that thickened at the bottom of my chest until every breath felt heavier than it should. I see now how the language of decency gets weaponized. Family takes care of family is a beautiful sentence when it describes reciprocity. Said with the wrong inflection, it becomes a leash. I thought that giving was proof I was a good person, that endurance was proof I was loving. But generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's abdication. The problem is, it took me most of my 20s to understand that line, and by then I'd crossed it so many times that going back felt like betrayal. Fini. What did I get in return besides the moral glow people wear when they call themselves selfless? I got invisibility. I got to be the dependable one in a family that never asked how that dependability was paid for. I got a role so entrenched that any attempt to rewrite it threatened the entire script. Emma got the bigger bedroom and the bigger forgiveness. I got the bigger tolerance for discomfort and the bigger bill. And yet, I kept telling myself a story I could live with. Once she's on her feet, once she finds the right job, once she grows up. There is always a once in these families. It is the word hope uses to disguise inertia. So when people hear the headline, "Woman wins $8 to7 million and refuses to share," they think I woke up one morning as a glacier. I didn't. I spent a decade melting into everyone else's troubles and calling it love. The money didn't harden me. It revealed the shape of a person who had been there all along, the one who deserved to be asked how she was doing, who was allowed to say, "I can't this time," without a courtroom appearing in her living room. Before the winning ticket, there was the inventory, the $63,000, the Sunday dinners, the labels that barked when I paused at the register of my own life. And there was the quietest truth of all. I was never thanked, never seen, never held without an invoice attached. When the Tuesday in March arrived with its fluorescent coffee and its absurd little dare against the universe, I was already primed for a different kind of answer. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted a life that didn't require me to disappear to make other people comfortable. The lottery didn't create my boundary. It simply gave me the means to enforce it. When I tell you what happened next, the lawyer, the 6 months of watching, the lies that tore through the last threads, I need you to understand the ground I was standing on. The win was a spark. The kindling had been stacked for years. The winning ticket lived for 3 days in the side pocket of my coat, folded like a receipt for milk and eggs. If you've never had your life change while you're still punching a time clock, let me tell you, ordinary hours become a fun house. That Friday, I sat in my car at 12:42 p.m. I know the time because the dashboard clock burned it into me, and I compared the numbers. Once, twice, a third time, whispering them under my breath as if the wrong tone might undo them. All 6 matched, clean as a chord struck on a well-tuned piano. The sound in my head wasn't music, though. it was silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind, like snowfall that erases roads. There's a reflex that comes from growing up as I did. Something wonderful happens. You go find the authority figure who can authorize your joy. I had my phone in my hand, Mom's contact open, thumb hovering over the call icon. Then my brain, trained by a decade of ambushes disguised as family dinners, played the scene for me. Oh, Lena. Rapid fire logistics. Emma needs a house. Of course, your father and I should retire early while we're healthy. We'll need to pay off Emma's loans. A small monthly allowance for family stability. In my mother's voice, my miracle already belonged to the family. In her math, my name was a category, not an owner. I closed the contact screen and rolled the phone face down on the passenger seat. I didn't call my mother. I called a lawyer. Patricia's office didn't look like a place where jackpots were discussed. No gold plaques, no framed oversized checks. Just gray carpet, a plant trying its best, and a conference table with a hairline scratch that kept catching the light. Sudden Wealth Management, read the little plaque by her door. Patricia herself was precise, calm, the kind of person whose presence lowers your pulse without trying. She asked to see the ticket. She didn't blink. She ran through verification steps as if reading a recipe. Sign the back, make copies, lock it up. We'd go claim it as part of a trust to keep my name off the evening news. She spoke softly, but didn't soften anything. Most winners, she told me, don't lose money because they buy ridiculous things. They lose it because people who were never entitled to it insist they are. You need time, she said, and you need observation. Her rules were a boundary disguised as a security protocol. Tell no one for at least 6 months. Change nothing visible. Keep my job. Keep my modest rent. Keep the 7-year-old Toyota with a clicky air vent. Open a blandly named account at a bank no one in my family used. Assemble a team, a CPA, a fiduciary advisor who gets paid to say no as often as yes, an estate attorney to build legal force fields. If there are people who love you for you, Patricia said, they'll love you the same when they think you have nothing to give. She slid a yellow legal pad across the table. Start a list, she said. Not of what you'll buy. Of what you won't explain. For the first week, I carried the ticket in a small fireproof pouch inside my tote, because the bank's safe deposit box appointment hadn't come through yet, and because I am, beneath every new possibility, still my anxious self. I went to work on Monday under the office's polite fluorescence and wrote copy about a spring campaign like the planet hadn't tilted. My coworkers debated oat milk versus almond, and I nodded in all the right places while thinking about irrevocable trusts. At 6:10 p.m., I microwaved leftovers in a plastic container and watched steam bead on the lid, and I thought, this is the last week where money can order me to feel small. Patricia's plan had a second layer, one that felt less like finance and more like anthropology. You're going to observe, she said. If your family loves you in a way that's safe, you'll know. If they don't, you'll know that, too. Observation meant I would continue to show up to my life exactly as I had before. Same hair, same jeans, same grocery list, and I would notice how transactions moved through our rooms. Mom's birthday arrived in April like a script cue. Chug. Her friends clinked glasses in the kitchen, and the dessert table smelled like store-bought frosting. She cornered me before the cake was cut and deployed the velvet voice. Emma was behind on rent. It's hard for young people these days. I reached into my wallet and handed her $200. Then I watched. The warmth rose on her face like a fast sunrise. Conversation over. Affection paid, gratitude clocked out. In May, Emma's engagement arrived with a ring big enough to be its own conversation. The party was at my parents' house, string lights slung like promises over the patio. Emma pulled me aside, champagne balanced on her fingertips. You'll help with the wedding, right? 5,000? It's basically nothing for a start. She said it as if she were offering to repay me with gratitude, which she'd never done before. When I hesitated, just a pause, a breath, her eyes did a small, efficient roll. Punctuation, not outrage. The period at the end of a sentence she'd already written for me. You'll do it anyway. By Thanksgiving, my sense of the stage had sharpened. I arrived with a pie and a plan to say very little. Mom's toast could have been drafted by a political consultant. Family is a blessing. We support one another. We rise together. Her eyes met mine on support like a teleprompter. Emma sighed about mortgage rates. The cousins laughed and refilled their drinks. I smiled, chewed, swallowed, and took notes in my head. The whole thing felt like a panel discussion where I was the only person who realized there were no microphones, just open hands. If it sounds like I'm mocking them, I'm not. I was studying them the way you study a dream after waking, trying to see what parts are symbols and what parts are warnings. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to discover tenderness I'd missed, reciprocity I'd been too tired to notice. But the longer I watched, the clearer it became. They didn't love me. They loved the way I cushioned their consequences. My mother's creed, family takes care of family, wasn't a braid. It was a siphon. And siphons, I learned from a YouTube video at 2A. Mao, keep draining until you break the flow. Meanwhile, the invisible architecture of my life shifted. I opened the trust with a name so ordinary it makes me smile even now. The bank manager didn't recognize me. The anonymity was delicious. My CPA, a woman whose spreadsheets were practically literature, taught me about tax lots and why patience is a return on investment. The fiduciary advisor explained the point of a no, to preserve the yes that matters. I drafted an estate plan that did something radical, mentioned my name more than anyone else's. If anything happened to me, the money would slip into the world like rain where it was needed, not where it was expected. Through summer and fall, I practiced being unchanged in public and becoming new in private. I cooked simple meals and learned the difference between price and value. I took quiet walks without rehearsing excuses. I said no to small invitations so I could feel how it sounded in my own mouth, so later I wouldn't stutter. Patricia called these boundary reps. You do the light sets before you lift the heavy thing. Then January arrived, brittle and bright, and with it the call that would test every gate I'd installed. My mother's voice came to me, thin and trembling, like a wire about to snap. Stage 3 breast cancer, she said. Surgery soon. Insurance gaps. We need $30,000. There are moments when old training sprints up your spine and tries to take the wheel. I almost transferred the money while she was still speaking. But 9 months of observation had given me a second reflex. Verify. I told her I would call back. I called her doctor's office instead. The receptionist put me on hold while my heartbeat counted ceilings. When she returned, her voice was the kind people use to smooth glass. My mother had been in for a routine checkup 2 weeks prior. No diagnosis, no surgery scheduled, no notes about oncology referrals. I thanked her and hung up, and I sat in my silent kitchen with the phone in my hand and my breath somewhere else entirely. There are lies that are clumsy because they're desperate. There are lies that are surgical because they're practiced. This one was both. It cut something clean inside me. I called my mother back. I told her what the clinic told me. The pause on the line was an entire season. Then the pivot. She'd misunderstood. She was just worried about future expenses. I was cruel to fact-check my own mother. But the spell had already broken. In that moment, the $7 million didn't feel like a pile of money. It felt like the right to say a complete sentence. I won't be giving you money anymore, I said. Not for this. Not for anything. My voice sounded like someone else's, steady, cool, as if it had been waiting for a mouth for years. That was the day the observation phase ended and the boundary began. What followed, the Starbucks with Emma, the intervention at my parents' house, the 7 words that changed the room, is a story of rupture you already think you know. But the truth is that January call was the fulcrum. The winning ticket had changed my circumstances. The lie changed me. It confirmed what the long experiment had suggested. If love requires my erasure to function, it isn't love. It's access. And access, for the first time in my life, was something I could close. 2 days after I told my mother the ATM was permanently closed, Emma texted, "Coffee? Just us. Sister to sister." The message wore friendliness the way a borrowed dress wears new, pretty, but not hers. I hesitated, then said yes. I wanted to see her without the chorus, to find out whether there was any version of us that didn't run on withdrawals. We met at a Starbucks with soft lighting and hard prices. She was already there, a picture assembled for a lifestyle feed, manicure like pale seashells, a sweater that made you notice the brand before the color. She hugged me in the way some people accept awards and gestured to the counter. "I ordered for us," she said brightly. "You like oat milk now, right?" A venti latte and a pastry waited with my name scrawled across the cup, $11. Fate of assumption. She didn't offer to pay. I tapped my card and pocketed the receipt out of instinct. Old habits are always first to arrive. Type. We sat near the window where the winter light made everything look honest. She didn't ask about my week. She launched. The ring on her finger caught the sun. She repositioned her hand to help it along. "So," she said, "we found a place. It's perfect. 3 beds, a yard, great schools. We're just short on the down payment. You're so good with money, Lena. You must have savings. It would mean so much if you could help. We figured $200,000. She delivered the number like a compliment, like asking me to be maid of honor to a mortgage. She smiled and waited for my reflex. For years, I'd had one. I used to fill silence with solution, like water finds a crack. But something quieter moved inside me now. The space that opened when I told my mother no, and the ceiling didn't fall. I didn't talk around it to make her comfortable. I didn't offer installments, conditions, a gentle later. I put my hands flat on the table so she could see I wasn't hiding anything and said, no. It's strange how fast a face can change, like weather crossing a small lake. Emma's smile dropped out of her cheeks and left the bones behind. No. She said it as if testing the syllable for stability. You're serious? I am. My voice surprised me again, steady in a way that felt anchored to bone. I'm not lending you money. I'm not giving you money. Not for a house. Not for anything. The performance ended. The person arrived. She laughed, short and sharp, and then the words came the way a dam releases. Selfish, bitter, jealous. Always the favorite. A new script that would have killed me with confusion a year ago, but now just sounded like noise. I'm 26, she said, and I can't even count on my own sister? You had it easier. You always have. I looked at her like you look at someone you love at a distance you didn't choose. I gave this family $63,000, I said. Do you remember any of it? The question wasn't a trap. It was an invitation to notice. She blinked, once, twice, then looked past me to the baristas pulling espresso shots, as if the answer might be written in steam. Fine, she said, standing too quickly. Be like that. Enjoy your... She gestured vaguely, as if the word money were impolite in public. Principles. We'll figure it out without you. She left the pastry wrapper and the paper napkin folded in half, like evidence of a small ceremony. I stayed to finish my coffee because I wanted to practice an ordinary ending. I wanted to walk to my car without crying, to put the key in the ignition with hands that didn't shake. 2 days later, my parents called. Family meeting, my father said. His voice had the stiffness of someone who spent the night memorizing lines. Tonight? 6 o'clock. I almost didn't go. But curiosity can be its own gravity, and part of me wanted to see the old house one more time with my new eyes. I drove there as the light thinned and parked in front of the lawn that had taught me as a child that straight lines mean you're doing it right. The living room had been staged like an intervention. My parents on the couch, the good throw pillows deployed as if soft objects could soften what was coming. Emma in the armchair, legs crossed, eyes already wet. No snacks, no scent of dinner. This wasn't hospitality, this was court. My mother began, as she always did, with a tone designed to sound like care. You're tearing this family apart, Lena. Your sister is about to start a life, and you're refusing to help out of spite. We raised you better. She reached for the word sacrifice like a favorite heirloom. Family takes care of family. My father nodded like punctuation. We've always been there for you, he said, and my mind did something automatic, scrolling through images, checking their claim against my archive. broken thermostat, freshman year. Solo graduation dinner because they were at Emma's showcase. The time my car needed brakes and I took the bus in January, while the SUV I'd co-signed for Emma sailed past me in the snow. I let the images wash through and out. When they paused, because every monologue needs to breathe, I spoke. How much have I given this family? I asked. They looked at each other, then at Emma, then back at me. No one answered. $63,000, I said, over the last 6 years. Rent, bail, credit cards, cars, flights, fees. And what came back? I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was logging. Did anyone ask if I could afford it? Did anyone ask how I was doing? Silence is a language too. It filled the room, thick and accusing, until my mother reached for her last instrument, severance. If you won't help your sister, if you won't be part of this family properly, then maybe you aren't our daughter at all. There are sentences you think will end you. Then you hear them, and something else happens. Something sheds. Something stands up. I felt it then, the opposite of collapse. Okay, I said. The word rang clear. If that's what it takes to be your daughter, then I'm not your daughter. The room reacted the way rooms do when scripts are shredded. Emma gasped. My father said my name like a reprimand. My mother sat back as if struck by light. I could feel the old habit rising, the one that wants to stitch everything back together with my own thread and call it love. I let the habit pass through me without grabbing on. I could have left it there. It would have been enough, me on my feet, the door, a new life waiting outside. But there is a point in every documentary when the off-camera truth becomes the point of the film. I had carried 7 words inside me for 10 months, measuring the weather of my family against the day I might speak them. The room went quiet, and I placed the words on the coffee table between us like documents. I won 7 million. You can measure time in the spaces between reactions. For a full second, no one moved. Then my mother blinked hard and leaned forward as if to catch them again. Repeat that, she said, too quickly. I did. 10 months ago, I added, and I told no one. The choreography was instantaneous. The tears vanished from my mother's voice, replaced by logistics. This changes everything, she said, and I saw the ledger assembling itself in her eyes. Emma needs the down payment. Your father and we can finally think about retirement, about the lake house Emma jumped in, laughter bubbling up like champagne from a shaken bottle. A car, she said, and the wedding, and furniture, we'll do it tastefully. We'll keep it reasonable, maybe a monthly allowance so we aren't always asking. I let them talk. It was important that I didn't interrupt the evidence. My father nodded through his wish list. My mother's hands moved as if conducting a piece she'd been rehearsing for years. Emma smiled with the relief of someone whose fantasy had found a sponsor. The only thing missing was the question, the one that would have cost nothing and would have meant everything. How are you? When the inventory of my fortune reached a natural pause, I spoke. No. My voice didn't rise. It deepened. Not $1. Not for a house, or a car, or retirement, or an allowance. Not after the last 10 months. Not after the lie about cancer. Not after the last 10 years. Silence. Then the volcano. My mother called me ungrateful. My father demanded I remember their sacrifices, as if parenthood were a loan with compounding interest. Emma threw words like stones, selfish, cruel, alone. I let them bounce off. I stood. You won't hear from me again, I said. Please don't contact me. If you do, I'll take legal steps. On my way to the door, my mother tried one last spell. Family takes care of family. I turned, hand on the knob, and gave her the final translation my life had taught me. Love is care without invoices. Whatever this has been, I said, it wasn't that. I walked into the dark with a steadiness that didn't feel like escape. It felt like arrival. In my pocket, my phone vibrated, the first of many calls I wouldn't answer. Behind me, the house that taught me how to disappear shrank in the rearview mirror until it was just a square of light on a street of lawn stripes. Ahead, the road. No audience. No ledger. Just the sound of my own breath, unbilled. The night I walked out, my phone became an instrument. First the vibrations, calls layered on calls until the screen looked like an EKG, then the texts. By the time I reached my apartment, my notifications had stacked themselves into a wall. I put the phone face down on the counter and stood in the quiet, letting my heartbeat and the refrigerator hum find each other. I had imagined a primal joy in finally choosing myself. What I felt was simpler, smaller, relief. The kind that arrives like a soft click when a door you've been leaning on your whole life swings shut from the other side. At 7:31 p.m., Emma's first text landed. We need to talk now. At 7:36 p.m., another. You're overreacting. You embarrassed Mom. At 7:39 p.m., the slur inventory began. Selfish, cruel, ungrateful. By 8:12 p.m., my mother joined. You don't mean this. Family takes care of family. At 8:44 p.m., Pete, we made you who you are? At 9:03 p.m., you owe us. The word owe pulsed on the screen like a vein. I remembered Patricia's yellow legal pad and the instructions she gave me on day 1. Start a list of what you won't explain. I opened my notes app and wrote 3 items. 1. I don't explain boundaries. 2. I don't negotiate with lies. 3. I don't pay invoices for love. By morning, the flying monkeys had arrived. The cousins I hadn't heard from in years. The aunt who once told me I was intense. A high school friend of my mother's, whose face I recognized only from Christmas photos. Their variations were predictable. Your mother is devastated. Surely you can compromise. It's just money. What kind of person abandons her family? Tommy, I thought of all the times I'd paid so I wouldn't be called the kind of person they were trying to call me now. Labels, I'd learned, are cheaper than gratitude. I blocked numbers until my call log looked like a redacted document. At 10:06, I called Patricia. She answered on the first ring. They're escalating, I said. We'll escalate, too, she said. By lunch, her office had drafted cease and desist letters. They were firm, clinical, full of phrases that felt like armored doors, harassment, defamation, legal remedies. She sent them certified to my parents and to Emma. Give it 48 hours, she said. Then we decide the next move. It took 12. at 8:22 p.m. Someone pounded on my door with both fists. It was the kind of pounding that tries to turn a threshold into a threat. I checked the peephole and saw my mother's crown of hair, the one she teased taller on holidays. Her voice was high, then low, then theatrical, calling my name so neighbors would hear. "Open up. Don't do this to us. You're cursed if you turn your back on blood." She slid notes under the door in handwriting I recognized from permission slips. "Evil. Ungrateful. Money will ruin you." The last one read like a prayer spoken into a mirror. I didn't answer. I called building security, then the police non-emergency line. I documented everything the way a documentary crew would, time-stamped, photographed, separated from feeling by the discipline of proof. The restraining order hearing was brief because the evidence was not. The judge had my call logs, the letters, the texts, the notes. My mother wore a navy dress and the expression of a woman wronged by an ungrateful daughter. When the judge spoke the order into the record, the air in the courtroom changed temperature. "No contact," she said. "No approach." My mother's mouth made a small, rehearsed O. For years, I had believed that the only thing protecting me from chaos was my willingness to fix it. It turned out the law could do, in 15 minutes, what I'd spent a decade attempting with apologies and wires and rides to pick up Emma from commitments she didn't keep. I moved 3 months later, not because I was running, but because newness needed space. A different city, a street with trees that didn't remind me of lawn stripes, a light in the kitchen that made morning look like possibility instead of inventory. I kept the Toyota and the rent under what I could easily afford, not as a penance for success, but as a practice of sanity. "Find you're comfortable enough," my fiduciary advisor had told me. "Then install a gate around it." Comfortable enough turned out to be groceries without arithmetic, and a therapist I paid in cash because I wanted privacy and because I was done apologizing for care. Therapy became the place where I learned the map of my old house in a new language: enmeshment, triangulation, golden child, parentification. The words didn't break me. They created a distance at which I could see. We traced how a sentence like "family takes care of family" can be a rope for one person and a leash for another. We practiced answers to questions no one may ever ask me. How are you? What do you need? What hurts? The exercises felt artificial at first, like writing with my non-dominant hand. But a truth grew under them. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you learn to lock and unlock from the inside. On the practical side, my team built the fire breaks. The trust remained blandly named and beautifully useful. I tightened my digital life, new email, new number, two-factor everything. I removed my parents from emergency contact lists and added a friend who had sat beside me at the restraining order hearing, holding a tissue she didn't have to offer. I updated beneficiaries the way people do when they finally believe they are not obligated to leave their life to those who treated it like an ATM. If something happened to me, the money would dissolve into the world like rain, not pooling where the ground was already saturated, but sinking where it was bone dry. Then I started deciding what to do with the part of the fortune that wasn't for me to keep. Not because of guilt, because of calibration. I remembered 19-year-old me eating instant noodles under a buzzing ceiling light, calculating whether I had bus fare or would walk. I remembered how small a number can be and still feel like a miracle. So I funded a scholarship for first-generation college students who work 2 jobs. Anonymous, because I wanted the gift to carry no story except theirs. I paid off medical debt for 3 families who had proof the crisis had happened, not just to their budgets but to their bodies. ICU bills that haunted their mail, oncology balances that turned refrigerators into guilt. The relief in their thank you letters felt like weather changing across a county, invisible on maps, unmistakable on skin. I said yes to a domestic violence shelter that wanted to add beds before winter, and to a literacy program that needed a second Saturday class, because the waiting list was longer than their grant report. I covered a security deposit for a single mom whose landlord insisted on 6 months up front because poverty, in our system, is so often taxed by suspicion. None of this made me a saint. It made me a person re-aiming a resource at outcomes instead of appetites. Privately, I took a financial literacy course, even though I now had a team and an attorney and a CPA. It wasn't about learning how to be rich. It was about learning how people build and protect stability when no one sneaks out behind them to remove the planks. I read case studies about sudden wealth and watched how often the plotline turned from joy to ruin because someone couldn't separate love from access. I learned to say a sentence that felt almost rude and therefore correct. No is a complete sentence. It protected my yes, which I wanted to reserve for things like time and gentleness, and showing up without keeping score. There were days when guilt tried to run its old routes. Birthdays that arrived without the family group text. Holidays when the neighborhoods lit up and I remembered our house smelling like nutmeg and performance. On those days, I let the ache exist without editing it into a moral. I walked in the park and drank coffee that didn't taste like justification. I called the friend who held the tissue, and we spoke about everything except money. I learned that solitude is not the same as loneliness, and that peace, when you are not used to it, can feel at first like an absence instead of a presence. The calls tapered. The letters stopped. The order did what orders do. It put structure where chaos wanted a seat. I returned to routines that used to be scaffolding and now were simply life. I wrote better at work because I wasn't writing excuses in my head. I slept deeper because no one could ask me for anything in the middle of a dream. I bought a small plant and kept it alive because I watered it when it needed water instead of when I remembered I owned it. None of this would make a highlight reel. But after the years I'd lived, ordinary was glamorous. If you're looking for a cinematic moment where I forgave my family, or they apologized, there isn't one. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't the same as access either. I can wish them health from a distance. I can hope Emma learns to tell the truth with her face as well as her mouth. I can hope my mother finds a way to feel secure that doesn't require me to be empty. Those hopes are not invitations. They are acknowledgments that my love of peace is not a weapon. It's a garden I'm learning to tend. A year out, the headline of my life is not "Woman Refuses to Share Lottery." It's "Woman Stopped Paying for Love and Began Paying Attention." I don't regret a cent I didn't spend on them. I don't regret a cent I spent making someone else's winter warmer or a student's spring lighter. But the purchase I am proudest of cost nothing at checkout. It was a sentence, perfectly formed and finally mine. No. And the door it opened on the other side. Yes, to a life where I am not a ledger, not a vein, not an instrument. Just a person, waking up, unbilled. Rumor travels faster than law. After the living room rupture and the 7 words that reset the room, I won 8 term. 7 million. My family built a new story in the neighborhood before my lawyer's letters even reached their mailbox. In their version, I'd been bewitched by money, poisoned by therapists who hate families, seduced by lawyers who saw me as a commission. In their version, I hadn't grown a spine. I'd lost my soul. I heard fragments in the parking lot of the grocery store, at the gym where I still swiped my old key tag, from a neighbor who couldn't help herself. "Your mother is devastated. Surely you'll do something. It's just money." It was almost funny, the same line they'd used for years to justify withdrawals now came dressed as morality. It's just money. As if the currency at stake had ever been dollars. Patricia's certified envelopes landed with the weight I needed. Cease and desist. No contact. The kind of language that turns fog into fences. When the first deadline passed and the texts kept coming, we filed for the restraining order you already know about. I will say one new thing about that morning in court. The judge's eyes were tired in the way eyes get when they've watched this film too many times. Entitlement rewritten as concern, access as love. "No contact," she said, "and no approach." Those 4 words were a strange benediction. I walked out holding a paper that wasn't a miracle, wasn't a ticket, wasn't even heavy. It was simply a boundary that everyone else would finally have to obey. The letters slowed, then stopped. The cousins who'd parroted my mother's outrage found other rehearsals. The aunt with the long memory and short empathy moved on to a different family's drama. Even Emma went quiet, which at first felt like mercy and then felt like windlessness, unnerving because you keep waiting for a gust. I used the stillness the way you use a lull between storms, to build. My estate attorney is a woman who thinks in contingencies and writes like a chess player. Together, we drafted an estate plan that was both a love letter and a line in the sand. If anything happens to me, my biological family receives nothing. Not a car, not a key, not a vase. The trust will shift into a second structure with instructions that read like a map, scholarships for first-generation students who work at least 15 hours a week, a medical relief fund that targets balances that grew from emergencies, not spa days, an operating grant line for shelters and literacy programs, with wait lists a model could weep over. I wrote a letter of intent that sits atop the documents like a preface to a book. It says what my will says in a voice that sounds like me. My life was never an ATM. If you're reading this now, make sure the money behaves like I never allowed others to behave, without entitlement, without strings, and with results you can point to, not just selfies. We updated the proxies, financial, medical, and I removed the people who would have spoken for me in a crisis, only to send invoices after. The friend who held the tissue at court became my emergency contact and, like later, my medical proxy. I didn't want family to be a loophole back into an old dynasty. I wanted care to be chosen, not presumed. There is a particular kind of email that arrives once you begin living your own life, small, plain, easy to ignore if you haven't trained yourself to see it. One came from an old coworker, Jenna, who knew a freshman at a community college, juggling 2 jobs and a grandmother's hospice. "No one big is coming to save her," Jenna wrote. I didn't know who else to ask. I remembered 19-year-old me walking to campus with a backpack that felt heavier than the degree inside it. I wrote back, asked for a transcript and a note from the bursar, and paid the next semester in full. No fuss. No letterhead. The bursar sent a receipt that read "paid" in angular caps. I saved the PDF like people save sonograms. The money changed shape in other quiet places. A domestic violence shelter director called to say their winter bed count was 1 short of what they needed. I asked what 1 bed cost, and then I added 2. A literacy program director sent a screenshot of their waitlist column and typed, "Any chance?" I like solving problems that fit on 1 screen. I like writing yes without a sermon. I gave a security deposit to a single mother whose landlord wanted 6 months up front because poverty in this country is so often taxed by suspicion. These weren't grand gestures. They were repairs. And each one taught me something my family never did. The difference between generosity as theater and generosity as plumbing. Theater changes applause. Plumbing changes lives. People imagine sudden wealth as yachts and watches and homes with pools that look like commas. I bought a rice cooker that turns off when it should and a vacuum that actually likes corners. I replaced underwear without doing math on a Tuesday. Comfortable enough, my advisor calls it, and then a gate. The gate is crucial. It keeps the inside from spiraling into a museum of purchases, and the outside from storming the lawn because there's a pool. Through all of this, therapy remained the lab where I studied the old language and learned new sentences. I told my therapist about the morning I woke and felt guilty because a holiday was approaching and my notifications were blessedly empty. "Our guilt is the echo of an old rule," she said. "You turned off the sound system. The room still remembers." We practiced quieting echoes without turning them into alarms. We practiced the difference between compassion and reunion. I can hope my mother feels safe someday without letting her into my home. I can hope Emma learns to apologize without moving my bank app back to my home screen. In late spring, an email arrived from Emma. It wasn't an apology. It was an architecture. Subject line, moving forward. The body was a spreadsheet's dream, an itemized list of needs disguised as a plan for reconciliation. Mortgage bridge, wedding catch-up, car replacement. "We'd like to reset," she wrote, "with clear expectations and a modest monthly stipend so we don't have to ask." The modest number was more than the rent on my first 2 apartments combined. There was a closing sentence about sisters, about the importance of modeling generosity for the next generation. There was no line that asked me how I'd been, I stared at the screen and felt nothing dramatic, just the old siphon, polished to a shine. I replied with one sentence that was a complete paragraph. I wish you well and will not be funding you. It read colder than I felt. But clarity isn't cruelty. It's mercy, correctly aimed. I know some people want me to say I miss them like a limb, that our last name tugs at me when mail arrives, that I ache in ways that only a kitchen I grew up in could soothe. The truth is stranger and simpler. I miss possibilities. The version of us that might have been if the Golden Child story had been about responsibility instead of spotlight, if family takes care of family had been a circle, not a spigot. I grieve the counterfactual. It's a clean grief. It doesn't require me to call anyone back. On paper, my life is boring in the way that keeps people alive. I go to work and do it well because my head isn't writing checks in the margins. I buy fruit without looking. I keep promises to myself that no one else will applaud. I walk to a park and sit on a bench I've mentally named paid for, not owed. Sometimes I watch a father teach a kid to wobble a bike into flight, and I think about how love shows up in lessons that don't hint at invoices. Sometimes I read a scholarship essay from a student whose job schedule makes my old schedule look like a luxury, and I email the registrar before I finish my tea. On a good day, I answer the phone without rehearsing a boundary first. On a bad day, I turn it off and look out the window long enough to remember that vice grips loosen. Slowly. Here is the part that feels like vindication. Though I flinch at the word because it sounds like a cape, my story did not end with a windfall. It pivoted on a boundary. The $7 million is a number in a file. The boundary is a fact in my bones. When people say money changed you, I nod. It did. It gave me the tools to make the change I'd been too frightened to claim. It let me stage a different family ethic in my small orbit. Ask people how they are, mean it, and never attach a receipt to your love. Soon, I'll tell you how the year closes, the last pieces I put in place, the letter I wrote to my future self, the blessing I mean for you if you've heard your own mother say you owe us in a voice that thinks it's sacred. But before the credits roll, know this: I am not a glacier. I did not freeze. I thawed from a life where warmth was rationed according to how much I could pay. And in the space that opened, I learned new algebra. Love without invoices equals peace. Access without consent equals theft. Boundaries equal a future. A year is not that long in calendar time, but it is an ocean in the life of someone who finally learns to swim. If you measure my last 12 months by headlines, not much happened. I kept my old Toyota for longer than people expect. I still make lists for the grocery store. I go to work where my colleagues argue about fonts and Q2. But if you measure it by interior weather, the air inside the lungs, the pressure behind the eyes, then everything changed. I wake without rehearsing excuses. I answer the door without bracing. I look at my phone and see names that ask how I am, not what I can cover. The $7 million didn't purchase that. So, a sentence did, short as a heartbeat, no. And then its quieter companion, one I had never learned to apply to myself. Yes, to a life where love and access are no longer synonyms. There are scenes I carry with me like documentary stills. The bursars paid stamped across a balance that would have ended a first-generation student semester. The nights a domestic violence shelter did not have to turn a mother and child back into the cold, because the ledger said there was room. The literacy class that added a Saturday section because an inbox waited not for applause, but for funds that arrived like plumbing, invisible and essential. None of these photos belong on a mantle. They belong in a ledger of meaning, the sort families rarely pass down because they cannot be held up at parties. I keep them anyway. They remind me that generosity is not a performance, but a system, water where it is dry, light where it is dark, quiet where there has been shouting. People ask, sometimes carefully, whether I miss my family. I miss possibilities. I mourn the version of us that could have existed if family takes care of family had been a circle rather than a siphon, if love had been measured by presence instead of invoices, if apologies had been offered before they were demanded. But grief that tells the truth does not drag you backward. It lets you walk forward with lighter steps. So I wish them health from far away. I wish for Emma the strange relief of an honest life. I wish for my mother a safety that does not depend on emptying me. Wishes are not invitations. They are acknowledgments that my peace is no longer a currency anyone can spend. If you have heard versions of the lines that built my life, you owe us. Don't be dramatic. Family takes care of family. Let me offer you a translation my year taught me. You owe no one your erasure. Drama is often the word used by people who benefit from your silence. Family is a verb, not a blood test. I did not become cold. I became clear. I did not choose money over love. I chose love that doesn't submit invoices. I did not harden. I unlearned the softness that others shaped into a tool. The law gave me paper fences when I needed them. Therapy handed me a language that did not exist at my childhood table. Enmeshment, parentification, boundaries as doors you lock from the inside. Friends, real ones, showed up with casseroles and no questions the week I moved, and with jokes when the silence felt too loud. My team stayed boring on purpose. My estate plan reads like a map that will keep helping when I cannot, and the letter on top says in words I recognize as my own, act where it matters, not where it is expected. On a quiet Saturday, I wrote something to my future self. It isn't legally binding, just personally sacred. If you ever feel the old breathless permission, slip sliding under the door, signed, obligation, countersigned, guilt, remember the January call about a cancer that didn't exist. Remember how you stood in a kitchen with your phone in your hand and chose verification over panic. Remember the living room where you placed 7 words on a coffee table, and the room rearranged itself around its own reflection. Remember the morning in court when a sentence, no contact, no approach, felt like a door closing on a drafty house. And remember the quiet after. The first time you cooked eggs and they tasted like breakfast instead of penance. Peace is not a prize at the end of compliance. It is the air you breathe when you stop paying to be allowed to breathe. If my story has a moral, drama wrapped in documentary with the hinge of vindication, it is not win the lottery and cut everyone off. Most of us will never hold a ticket that flips a balance sheet. The hinge is smaller and harder. Believe your data. If someone loves you only when you're paying, that is not love. If your name appears only in sentences that include a number, step out of the paragraph. If you cannot imagine saying no, practice until your mouth recognizes your own voice. Boundaries do not make you unkind. They make kindness possible. To those of you watching who have wrestled with toxic dynamics, who have been told that saying no makes you selfish, who have been assigned the job of keeping everyone comfortable at the cost of your own breath, I see you. I hope this film let you borrow my sentence and try it on for size. If it pinches or shakes, keep it on anyway. New shoes always do. If you have a story you can share, a boundary you set, a receipt you finally stopped paying, put it in the comments. Stories are how we hand each other flashlights. Your words may be the light someone else needs when their kitchen goes dark and their phone starts to ring. Thank you for staying with me to the end, for listening through the quiet parts and the loud ones, for choosing to spend your time on a story that, at its heart, is about the cost of being seen and the price of finally seeing yourself. I wish you good health and the kind of family happiness that grows from reciprocity, not requirement. I hope your home is filled with laughter that doesn't come with conditions, with dinners that don't end in invoices, with mornings that start without dread. If this story resonated, if it moved you, steadied you, or gave you one sentence you needed, please subscribe for more true stories about boundaries, healing, and choosing your own path. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that their peace matters more than other people's expectations. And wherever you are, tonight or this afternoon or this early morning, may you feel that simple relief I found when the door finally clicked in the other direction. May you breathe and find that the air is yours. Thank you. Be well. Take care of your peace and let your love be receipt-free.